Welcome back to Catastrophe Chronicles. I'm Katie Babbick, disaster enthusiast, history nerd, and someone who definitely would not pass a NASA psych test.
And I'm Arin Babbick, the guy who listens to these stories whether I like it or not.
In this podcast, we dive into the world's greatest disasters, natural, man-made, and sometimes the result of people making just spectacularly bad decisions.
Like ignoring glaring safety concerns and launching a doomed space shuttle.
Exactly! Today we're wrapping up our space disaster series with the tragic final flight of the Columbia. This was NASA's second space shuttle disaster, and much like the Challenger, it was preventable.
Because if history teaches us anything, it's that ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away.
So strap in, because today we're taking a hard look at the decisions, the warnings, and the heartbreaking aftermath of the Columbia disaster. Hello, everyone, and welcome back.
Welcome back.
We did it. We made it to the fourth episode of our Disasters in Space series.
It's been a long journey.
We're going to do it. We're going to finish it this week. We might do sometime in here a one-off of Russian space disasters, but it won't be officially part of our space disaster series. So if you want to do that, let me know. If you don't care, don't say anything. And I'll just keep doing what I do. But yeah, we have gone through Apollo 1, Apollo 13, Challenger. Took us 2 weeks because I really wanted to dig into that. I am not splitting Columbia up. This is going to be a much shorter episode because, honestly, you already know.
We covered all the backstory problems.
Covering the Challenger.
I still have some lingering rage.
Well, you're going to have more rage because,
Oh, good.
NASA just keeps making bad decisions, which is charming. Exactly what we want to hear. So to kind of recap, if you haven't listened to the previous 3 episodes, you should. But a brief recap of what led us to where we are today. The space program started in the 1960s. And in the 1960s, for the most part, it went pretty damn well, with the exception of the Apollo 1. Now, Apollo 1 was definitely the result of mistakes that were made, but it's a different kind of level of mistake, in my opinion, than the Challenger and the Columbia.
And they fixed it for subsequent missions.
They fixed it. But a large part of it was because they were filling it with 100% oxygen, right? And they weren't really staying on top of their contractors. So a fire started, it killed 3 astronauts. And then we went to Apollo 13. Mm-hmm. And Apollo 13, an oxygen tank exploded while they were in space. And NASA, it's considered NASA's finest moment to this day because they worked their butts off and got those boys home.
Yeah.
Which is just an incredible story. I love Apollo 13. And obviously, watch the movie. Listen to our podcast.
Yeah.
Listen to our episode on it and then watch the movie. And then we talked about Challenger and yeah. Go listen to them if you haven't, but just
problem
if you have
problem after problem, ignored.
Yeah. That's the basics of it, that the space shuttle pretty much from the beginning had nonstop problems that were ignored over and over and over again. And specifically with the Challenger, the O-rings were identified as a problem from the very, very beginning, and they ignored it. It became obvious through subsequent flights that in the cold, O-rings were even more of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not addressed. And to make matters even worse, up until basically the last minute, there was people basically screaming, "Don't launch this shuttle, it's going to kill people." And then they launched it, and it killed people.
And they hadn't told the astronauts any of this.
Yep, they hadn't told the astronauts. And most of the astronauts only found out there were so many problems through the hearings that happened after the Challenger. So that's, brief recap of, I think it's 6 hours worth of content we've produced on space disasters at this point.
Years and years of span of time.
Yep. So we're going to kind of fast forward up to the 2000s. We'll go through a little other things. We'll start with our quote and all of that. But I really wanted to kind of give a recap because this is 4 episodes in to a long series. And I wanted to do it this way because they all do really build on themselves. And part of what I really like about disasters is understanding where they come from in history. And a lot of times for ones we do, it's, I don't want to say easy, but I can kind of run down the history of it in 20 minutes. This is not one of those.
No, we dove into that hard.
We dove into it hard. So yeah, that's where we are. And then I tasked Arin with picking our drink tonight. So can you tell us what we're drinking?
Well, maybe we should have done this for the last one. It's inspired by the Challenger.
Oh, Lord, you're really mad. You're so mad you had to pick a Challenger drink.
It's another ChatGPT drink.
Yes.
It's pretty tasty.
Wait, did you forget that we were doing the Columbia tonight and ask it for a Challenger drink?
Initially, yes. And then I looked, and then I got a Columbia drink, but we didn't have all the ingredients, so I went with this one.
All right, fair enough.
So this consists of, it's vodka, blue curacao, orange juice, grenadine, and lemon lime soda.
I feel like we keep drinking the same drink over and over again, and I'm not mad about it.
But this one tastes a little different. So I modified it, honestly.
I'm not mad at all about vodka, blue curacao, and Sprite. Like that doesn't make me mad at all. I'm not mad at it.
We didn't have any. I didn't actually make orange juice for it. I used orange bitters instead.
Oh, okay.
And so it gives it that kind of like bitter taste to it.
It's good. I like it.
Because
it's
the last few episodes left a bitter taste in my mouth.
Oh, hey, I see what you did there. Only the last two.
Oh no, we're
once a week. I just ruin your day. All
of the constant, like, people shout. The engineer is saying that there these problems. Yep. This is going to be bad.
Yep.
And mill management being like, "No, shut up," and not even passing it on. And
it's fine. It's fine.
No, we got deadlines to meet. No, we got publicity. No, we got funding that we need to keep or get.
Mm-hmm.
And the contractors, like, one that it's just money grubbing. Like,
it's a mess.
So frustrating.
It's a mess. On that note, the quote I picked.
Oh, lay it on me.
It is from an appendix from the Rogers Commission, which is the commission that investigated everything that happened on the Challenger, that we went through all those things. Do you remember Richard Feynman from last episode?
Vaguely.
He's the one who did the O-ring test with the glass of ice water.
Yes.
Who got really, really mad. The physicist. A Nobel Prize winning physicist. He got so mad about all of this, much like Arin, that he insisted that he get to write his own appendix to the Rogers Commission report.
Right, because it wasn't mean enough.
He didn't think it was mean enough. So this is from that appendix.
Good.
For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled.
Damn.
Yep.
I love that. That's good.
It's very good. And it's very
nature cannot be fooled.
Because they did not learn that lesson, as we're going to discuss over the next.
Physics does not give a shit about your publicity.
Nope. Physics doesn't give a crap whatsoever. And I feel like NASA, especially at this time, was so bound and determined to be the smartest person in the room that they forgot that reality doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
At all.
About your ego either.
Yeah. So to kind of bring us to where the Columbia happens, we got to talk about a few things that we didn't totally go over. When Richard Nixon was president, he did not approve of the International Space Station. If we remember way back when we were first discussing the Challenger and what NASA was going to do after the Apollo missions, one of the things that came up was using the space shuttles to go back and forth to a space station and have a permanent base in space.
Yeah.
Richard Nixon nixed that idea, so we went to just space trucks going in and out. But in 1984, Ronald Reagan was like, nah, I'm good with the space station. That's actually a great idea. And he approved plans to build a space station. Except instead of doing it the way NASA had originally proposed in the 1970s, they decided to make it a truly international effort. So, the International Space Station.
Okay.
The idea was born, and work started on it in 1984, so just a couple of years before Challenger.
The year after I was born.
The year after you were born. We were working with places like Russia, India, the European space conglomerate, just all over the world. And everyone was going to have different pieces and parts to do on the International Space Station. The United States, for example, would carry up some parts of it in their space shuttle bays. They would carry up people to go onto the space shuttle. Russia would, in a number of different ways, build pieces of it and launch the really big pieces on their single rocket boosters.
Okay.
So unmanned, just launch them into space and let them go. And then NASA would go up and kind of put them back together and arrange everything. Yeah, it was a really, really cool effort to get everything together, and really kind of amazing that we were able to negotiate with so many different countries, because that's so many different budgets that you have to balance and so many different things. But They're working on it.
Yeah.
They're working on it from 1984. So this is
making sure that all those different components work together too.
Yes.
From so many different programs and engineer groups.
Big effort. And we kind of take the International Space Station for granted now, but it was a huge deal. And unsurprisingly, this put a lot of pressure on NASA because they're not only having to meet their own deadlines, they're having to meet deadlines for other countries as well.
Yeah.
And just a lot moving pieces and a lot of pressure in a lot of different directions between budget and timing and everything else. Just was a lot of work. And that work takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Right? True to form, NASA was behind the ball and over budget from basically the very beginning. It did not help that the Challenger exploded in 1986 and the entire fleet was grounded for quite a while. And then with that, too, after Challenger, there was some pretty massive safety changes that had to be enacted and change, all kinds of different things. Launches started again in 1988 for NASA after the Challenger, so about 2 years for commercial, military, and science-based payloads. But the first ISS, International Space Station module, wasn't launched until November 20th, 1988, and it was launched by Russian rockets. So NASA's behind. They're getting a lot of stuff done, but it's still, it's a lot. The space station was built to last until 2030, at which point it was supposed to be replaced by a commercial venture that NASA would rent in space so that they could focus on deep space exploration. So we're actually coming to the end of the lifespan of the International Space Station here in the next 5 years. And they are planning on decommissioning it and basically dropping it from space into the ocean in 2030, which we'll get to what they're replacing it with at the end of this episode. But we are getting to the end of the International Space Station's lifespan. The International Space Station was supposed to include a ton of different research capabilities, like medical research and how the body reacts in space so that we can help people in space and keep them in space longer. The idea being we need the International Space Station as our jumping off point to be able to get people to Mars. If we can't keep people in space for a long time safely, we can't send people to Mars. So that was actually, they're giving forethought, unlike they did during the Apollo missions, to what they were going to do after, and using this now as a stepping stone, which I think is a pretty good thing. It takes, or theoretically, it's going to take 7 to 9 months to fly to Mars. But the round trip is going to be a total of around 21 months. And that's because you have to wait until the planets are in alignment.
Well, yeah.
So you can't just go at 2:00 in the afternoon. You have to wait until they're in the right spot in space to be able to actually get home.
Yeah, I mean, the calculus involved in that is...
Yeah, tons and tons of stuff.
It hurts my brain to try and conceptualize.
Now, I think this is super fucking cool, but also not very exciting to the public. People were not... I don't want to say they were unexcited about it. It was nothing like the first time the shuttle launched. It's nothing like the Apollo missions. It's nothing like landing on the moon, especially because in the United States in particular, I think there's a lot of kind of nationalism that goes into our space program, and the International Space Program didn't feel like ours. So the combination of a lot of different factors made it pretty uninteresting to the general public at large. I think it's super cool.
Space Station is pretty awesome.
But not a lot of people are into it. And I think you also have to remember, too, no one has gone past low Earth orbit since the Apollo missions. Even the International Space Station is considered low Earth orbit. No one has been past that since Apollo. That's not super interesting to people who are not into space.
Yeah,
right?
It's not something bigger and better.
It's not. It doesn't feel bigger and better.
That's what I mean.
There's a lot of cool stuff about it for nerds.
It's not flash.
But it's not flashy. It's not spicy. And I get it. So that brings us to the Columbia. So just a reminder, the Columbia was the very first space shuttle that was ever created. It was the first one that was launched. It's the first time that NASA ever flew a manned test flight for their first flight.
Oh, that's right.
That was the Columbia with Bob Crippen and John Young, and they were the ones who, I think it was Bob Crippen, who said, "What a way to California." And that was the very first time any space shuttle launched, and it was the Columbia. So she's an old girl.
Yep.
By the early 2000s. She is the oldest of the space shuttles. She was just kind of I don't know, the best way to describe it is like the redheaded stepchild. She was built first. She was built slightly differently than all of her sisters because they learned things from the way they built her. She was a bit heavier, especially in the rear. She had a fat booty. She had some slightly different tech that they had upgraded over time, but overall, she was the oddball out of the space shuttles. And with that meant there was a lot of people who didn't like working on her, didn't appreciate her.
Aw.
But she also had this kind of like dedicated crew of people that just loved her and thought she was the best. There was a long-standing joke that the Columbia had problems at home all the time because she just really loved being in space. And a lot of the people in like the different articles and books that I read, more than any other ship I've ever read about from NASA, anthropomorphized. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Anthropomorphized the Columbia, and really just they loved her. And losing the Columbia was almost as sad as losing the crew members when it went down for the people who really cared about her. And I just thought that was beautiful.
But there are some ships that kind of they kind of have a personality.
And the Columbia seems to be one of those. I hadn't thought about that in the context of like Navy ships, but yeah.
Craft in general, Navy ships too.
I meant naval, like ocean ships, not necessarily military.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I hadn't thought of it in that context. But yeah, very much so. She had her own personality and she had her own fan club. She had groupies. And I love that she had a fat booty because, we have that in common. NASA also built the orbiter Endeavour to replace the Challenger in 1987. So lots of cool things happening with NASA since Challenger. And for the most part, it seemed like there was some good changes immediately after in terms of that safety culture and the way they were dealing with things. But obviously, I'm going to get to some of the stuff that didn't go well. 24 days before the launch.
Okay.
NASA grounded the entire fleet because they found cracks in the fuel lines.
On the rockets or on
one rocket?
On the platform.
On the Endeavour and the fuel lines of the Endeavour.
Okay.
And because they found cracks there, they went and looked on other shuttles and realized other shuttles were starting to develop cracks. They hadn't had any issues yet, but they were like, we can't have cracks in the fuel line, so we're going to go ahead and fix it.
Ages better than the lead up to the Challenger.
I wanted to start with something good that they did, right?
They saw a problem and they fixed it.
They did. There was just shit tons of engineers that were flown down to test and figure out what was going on. The Columbia mission had already been pushed back a number of different times at this point because it wasn't part of putting together the International Space Station.
Okay.
It was going to be strictly a science-based mission. So if anyone was going to get bumped, it was Columbia. So they'd been pushed back a ton. And the crew of the Columbia had been together for a couple of years at this point, training together when that fuel thing happened. And they were one of the closest crews that had ever taken off on a shuttle because they spent so long training for their mission, which is just kind of bananas. There were, however, other issues.
Of course.
Things like tires were being damaged every flight from the beginning. Things like the heat tiles. Do you remember the heat tiles? Talking about those? Just a brief overview if you don't remember. The bottom of the ship is completely covered in these super lightweight heat tiles. And from the beginning, we talked about this several times, heat tiles got damaged almost every single launch. And these were incredibly fragile. And if they get damaged, they can cause massive issues with reentry because if you don't have a shielding from all of that excessive heat that happens when you come into the atmosphere, your ship's going to melt and fall apart. It's not great. So we're still having tons of heat tile damage, and it's being kind of brushed off as like, oh, it's not actually catastrophic. It's not a big deal. They're getting slightly damaged every flight, and, that's a thing. One of the other things, though, was foam. Now, I want you to picture, we've talked about the rockets before. We have the orbiter, and behind the orbiter, you have the solid rocket boosters on either side, and in the middle, you have the main engine compartment, which has the majority of the fuel in it. The main fuel tank in the middle there is completely covered in like spray-on foam. That orange stuff you see on it?
It's spray-on foam.
It's spray-on foam. And it's on there because what's in it is cryogenically frozen oxygen, and you don't want to put the cryogenically frozen oxygen and hydrogen on a launch pad in the baking Florida sun for several hours, because if it gets too warm, It's going to explode.
So they needed to insulate
So
it.
they needed to insulate it, and they used insulated spray-on foam. And I mean, it's NASA foam, so I'm sure it has differences
High-tech
from what
foam.
we throw in our walls, but, it's spray-on foam, and
Got
it's
it.
painted orange. From the beginning, the spray-on foam fell off. It would fall off every single mission. They called it popcorning. Little pieces of it would fall off. Sometimes bigger pieces of it would fall off. Now, here's the thing. One of NASA's main rules is that you are not allowed to have any debris that hits the craft during launch.
Right.
That's not supposed to be a thing that happens because it's a danger to the orbiter. It's a danger to the entire mission. Like, it's not great. However, because this had happened so many times and there had never been any major damage, it kind of became a mantra within NASA, or at least that's what I read, that, they would tell themselves it's just foam, it's fine, and they would brush it off, and they never really did anything about it because this foam was so lightweight, they didn't think it could do any damage.
Okay.
It was so lightweight that they never bothered to even do testing to see if it flying at something at 750 miles an hour might damage it, which doesn't sound familiar at all, right? But they never even tested it.
Yeah.
Right around the same time we found those cracks in the fuel lines was the flight STS-112 Atlantis in 2002, just a few months before the Columbia launched.
Okay.
Now, on the STS-112, a large piece of foam, not the little popcorning, but a large piece of foam fell off during launch.
Okay.
And it fell off and struck the solid rocket booster.
Oh, don't touch those things.
Everything went fine. Nothing blew up. But it fell from... There's these little, tubes that connect the rocket boosters. And the left side ones in particular were kind of notorious for pieces kind of falling off. And they had tried several different ways to get the foam on better so that it didn't fall off of that particular area, but it was still happening. And for this flight, STS-112, big piece fell off. It was the biggest piece to date. And it hit that solid rocket booster. And when they retrieved it from the ocean to do that, post-review of everything, they found that it had left a large dent inside the solid rocket booster.
Oh, damn.
This is lightweight foam. The whole idea has been it can't damage anything. And now it's left a dent.
Yeah.
A few months before. There was a number of engineers that were like, we probably should ground the fleet until we figure out the foam issue because this seems like a big deal. We don't fully understand this. We don't have a good solution on how to keep the foam from falling off. Our premise that it can't damage, obviously, is not accurate. And they were turned down. They were told absolutely not. With that,
it's an anomaly.
The flight before that as well was hit by a vulture while it was launching, which I just bring up because it's just bananas to me. Just absolutely bananas. Because the vulture did do a little bit of damage, not a lot, but it did do damage. But if the vulture had hit a window, it would have killed everyone. And that's just the combination of the foam and the vulture, the universe was sending y'all a message.
I mean, I'm picturing Looney Tunes style.
It was kind of Looney Tunes.
This rocket coming up and vulture flying into it. Just poof.
It is literally what happens. And they're very lucky that it didn't hit the window, like I said, because it would have been so much worse. But yeah, it was just that.
That vulture had a bad day.
Vulture had a very bad day.
It was a
very, very bad day. So the Columbia is going to launch anyway. It's been on a ton of delays. This mission happened, or this foam strike happened on that mission. They grounded everyone, not for the foam, but for the cracks in the fuel lines, which is good. I mean, I brought that up for a reason. It's important to note that they did make some changes, and that's one of them.
That they did ground everything.
They weren't ignoring everything. They were just ignoring a lot of things.
Fingers in their ears. No.
The Columbia mission, it was going to be STS-107, which should tell you about how much it's been pushed back. 112 was the one before it. This was going to be the 113th shuttle mission.
Oh. Huh.
But it's 107. So it's just been pushed back over and over. This was going to be a very long mission comparatively, and they had already been shutting down a lot of the Cape stuff during missions because this is post 9/11. There was a lot of fears of terrorist attacks and how, because the space program is such a symbol for America. So they already had been patrolling and, kind of keeping the Cape on lockdown during launches. They weren't releasing launch dates until, 12 hours before, things like that. But this mission was going to be the first time an Israeli astronaut went into space.
So, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty cool, which is, I'm not going to get crazy into the story, but the story behind how Ilan Ramon ended up becoming an astronaut is pretty cool. One of the ambassadors for Israel, or diplomats for Israel, was at a space museum, and his son asked why there was no Israeli astronauts, and the ambassador was able to work in getting an Israeli trained as an astronaut to go into space for a science mission, which is just kind of a cool little side note of how that ended up happening. But the Cape is crazy lockdown because there's even more concerns now having an Israeli on board that this is going to be a bigger issue. They extended the no-fly zone significantly. They had snipers on all of the buildings. They had snipers in the swamp. It was kind of bananas how locked down it was.
I mean, like, for the years post 9/11.
Yeah, anyone who's old enough to remember that, 2003 was even, that's 2 years later, but it's still, it's a lot. We were very frightened. Everything was very serious in this. Like I said, the space program is a symbol. So they locked it down. And so they had it locked down. To kind of just, I feel like this is the best spot to talk about it. This is, again, another one like Challenger where there's only 7 people that perished in this. So I wanted to take a moment near the beginning of the episode to talk about each one of them because they were all really, really cool people, and it's very, very sad that they perished in this. So the commander of the mission was Rick Husband. Rick Husband was an incredibly devoted religious man.
Okay.
He loved his church. He was known for his beautiful singing voice, and he would often sing hymns. He was just very, very into his religion. He was also an incredibly accomplished pilot, and he was, I would say he's an accomplished astronaut, but this was only his second flight. So it was pretty amazing that he was a commander on his second flight. That's a pretty big deal to make it that far that quickly. He was born in Amarillo, Texas, and he grew up dreaming of flying in space, just very, very excited about it. His first flight was STS-96 in 1999 before commanding STS-107. He saw himself as not just a leader, but as kind of the caretaker of the crew. And he took that role very seriously. And throughout the course of their training, they did this like bonding trip to Wyoming where they spent 2 weeks in the wilderness just becoming a crew. He really, he took it very seriously, making sure that everyone was taken care of, everyone was safe, everything was going okay. So
awesome.
That's who's leading. William McCool, or Willie McCool, was
a name.
I know, right? Was the pilot. He was born in San Diego.
That checks too.
Right? But raised in Texas. McCool. He excelled in academics, athletics, and later aviation. He was a U.S. Navy commander and flew more than 2,800 flight hours in various aircraft before becoming an astronaut in 1996. Columbia was his very first mission, and he was beyond stoked. Just absolutely loved it. He talked about, while they were in space, repeatedly about how much he appreciated the moment and how much he just loved being there. Michael Anderson was on the flight as well. He was a payload commander. He knew from a young age that he wanted to fly and that he wanted to go to space. He grew up in Spokane, Washington, and he often would lay on the roof of his house staring at the night sky, dreaming about going up there. He served in the Air Force, and he followed his father's footsteps, becoming a pilot and eventually an astronaut. He was one of the few Black astronauts at NASA, and he inspired others to reach beyond what seemed possible. He flew once before on STS-89 and was chosen as a payload commander for 107, overseeing many of the science experiments on the Columbia.
Now, you said following his father's footsteps. Became a pilot and an astronaut. Was his
I'm
father
sorry,
an
his
astronaut?
father was a pilot, not an astronaut.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But he followed in his father's footsteps as a pilot. And his father really loved space. So that's part of it. But no, he wasn't an astronaut. Then we had Kalpana Chawla. She was a mission specialist and the first woman of Indian origin in space. She was born in Karnal, India, and really defied a lot of cultural expectations by becoming an astronaut. And really, even just by earning her PhD in aerospace engineering. She was the cutest, just loved everything. One of the videos of her is of her looking at the space shuttle right before she climbed aboard, going, wow, this is really big. And just it made me laugh. It was very, very cute. One quote from her that she said at one point was, "The path from dreams to reality does exist. May you have the vision to find it, the courage to get to it, and the perseverance to follow it."
Oh,
Love
wow.
her.
That's pretty good.
David Brown, mission specialist. He was a doctor, pilot, gymnast, and circus performer before he was an
What?
astronaut, right? So damn cool. He was
I
born.
do everything.
He really he's a Renaissance man all the way through and through. Could juggle and shit. Like, man. He was born in Arlington, Virginia. He started his career as a physician, but later trained as a Navy pilot and eventually became a flight surgeon. He was known for just boundless enthusiasm and willingness to embrace challenges. One point he said, "I can't imagine a more fun job than flying in space." Columbia was also his first mission, and he was very, very excited about it. Laurel Clark was the other mission specialist. She was a Navy doctor who specialized in undersea or submarine medicine before she reached the stars. She was born in Amos, Iowa, and raised in Wisconsin. She had a husband and her son, Ian, and I really, really liked her. She was very, very sweet. She believed deeply in exploration, and one of her quotes was, this is from On the Columbia,
Okay.
"Hello from above, our magnificent planet Earth. The perspective is truly awe-inspiring." Just says a lot. And then the last one is Ilan Ramon. He is our Israeli astronaut.
Okay.
He was a payload specialist. He was Israel's first astronaut and very much had kind of a weighty history on him with everything that was going on in the world at the time.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because you got to think about what's going on there. We're deep in Afghanistan. We're deep in the chaos in the Middle East. They've already had the big war where everyone attacked Israel. Israel's a bit more established now and all these other things, but in 2003 it wasn't quite as much. So it was a big deal for him to go up. His father was a Holocaust survivor.
Wow.
And his father was also an accomplished fighter pilot who participated in Israeli missions. Again, weight of history.
Okay.
Ilan also brought a number of really meaningful artifacts with him to space, including a pencil sketch called Moon Landscape, which was drawn by a 14-year-old Holocaust victim in a concentration camp. He saw his mission as one of hope and unity, saying, "I feel I am representing all Jews and all Israelis."
Okay.
So, it was a pretty big deal that he was up there. Now, Columbia was due to launch, Columbia did launch on January 16th, 2003, and it was due to land at the Cape on February 1st, 2003 at 9:16 a.m. 16 days packed absolutely full of science. Most of the astronauts' families were really excited for them.
Of course.
Really, really happy and ready for them to go to space. But Laurel Clark, her son, had a really hard time with it. Her husband and her son had actually survived a plane crash 3 weeks before the Columbia was set to go off. They all were okay, bumps and bruises, but they survived a fucking plane crash. And,
what the hell?
Right? Her 7-year-old son, Ian, was like, "I absolutely not. Do not want my mom to go to space. I don't want her to fly. This is bullshit." Very, very upset about it. And he was
traumatized.
Very much so. He's doing good now, guys. But he had a very hard time everyone did.
Yeah.
But he in particular had a really hard time. He really didn't want his mom to go. They had such a hard time convincing him to not lose his shit. They actually snuck him into quarantine because the astronauts are supposed to quarantine for a week before they go up so they don't get the measles again. Remember that measles guy?
Oh, yeah.
Who avoided Apollo 13. They did quarantine before that, but this is why they do quarantine.
Yeah.
To avoid this nonsense. They stuck him in, though, to give his mom a hug one more time before she left because he was just so upset about it.
Oh, man.
Poor Ian had that premonition. Michael Brown actually had a premonition that he wouldn't survive. He told a number of people that he didn't think he was going to make it home from this flight, and people acted like he was crazy, and he was like, "No, I really don't think I'm going to live through this, but I'm going to go anyway because I really want to go to space."
What did he ever say why?
Nope, just a feeling he had. He didn't think he was going to make it. It's kind of bonkers, and I'm not. I'm a little stitious. I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious. This kind of stuff makes me even, moderately stitious.
Yeah.
Because he told a number of people he didn't think he was going to survive. Ian said he didn't think his mom was going to survive. There was
Yeah.
There was other stuff with the foam, too, that's important to note, that there was very clear indications from the universe and from science. But
I mean, poor Ian, like, he just went, they survived a plane crash, so
it would make sense to everyone why he was so upset, but also, like,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's something there. There's something there, guys. So that's where we are. They're going to be launching very soon on pre-launch day, or on launch day. They all went out to play their poker game and eat steak and eggs for breakfast. Everyone's done since the Apollo missions. It's Neil Armstrong started the tradition.
Oh, that's cool.
And literally every NASA space launch, the astronauts have played a poker game and had steak and eggs for breakfast before they launch. Just kind of a cool, nifty little tradition. After they did that, though, they all got together and said a prayer. And there's this really beautiful photo of the group of them with their arms wrapped around each other, saying a prayer together. And it's really poignant to me because it represents so much of what's good about the International Space Station and good about NASA in general, because you've got a Jewish person, you have a Hindu person, you have a devoutly Christian man, and then you have a couple of people that we're not totally sure where they land, all together, praying together and accepting each other for who they are, and not, there's no one over the other. They very much were just praying to their higher powers and praying for each other together. And I thought that was beautiful.
That is beautiful.
And the photo is just really, really lovely. So they do that. They take their Astro van over to the launch pad, another tradition. They've been using, it's not the same van, but the same style of van since the Apollo mission. So literally that old school 60s Astro van is what takes
It's a Chevy Astro?
It is. And it's painted NASA. They take it every single time, which is just, I love the little weird NASA traditions. And I'm going to make you sad, so.
A buddy of mine growing up, his family had an Astro van.
Yeah?
Yeah. And
did he go to space?
No. No, but his dad was super frugal.
Mm-hmm.
So he wouldn't replace the van. He would just, when the engine went out, he would buy a new engine and swap it out in the same van.
Don't know if that counts as frugal.
It was cheaper than buying a new van.
Fair enough. Well, there you go. They were, maybe NASA was being frugal with their Astro van. I think it's more of a tradition, though.
Yeah, more of a tradition, and it's the Astro.
It is, and it's the same type of van every single time. And if you look at the pictures, it's not something that, they talk about in the news when they're doing the review of it and everything, but it's the same damn van every time. And they do have new ones, but it's the same type of van, which I think is cool. They had to go up 195 levels to get into the orbiter. The family gathered up at their 3 miles away to be able to watch the launch. Everything looked real good. The launch looked like it went perfect. It rocketed up. The sounds were what you expect. There's no, Challenger explosion going on. They lifted off and got into space pretty damn easy. It didn't take long for both reporters and NASA, upon reviewing the footage of what had happened, to notice that a piece of something had fallen off of the main fuel tank and hit the left wing, creating this poof of white material 81 seconds after launch.
Let me guess. A heat tile.
Well, it's foam that fell off, and no one knew what the puff of white was at this point. Because is it foam? Is it heat tile? Is it along the edge of the wings? There's the reinforced carbon. Could it be that? No one knows, because these are blurry videos and they could only see part of what had happened, but something fell off of the fuel tank and hit the wing. We're pretty damn sure that it's foam. They figured out pretty quickly that the piece of it was about the size of a suitcase, which is even larger than the one that fell off the STS-112, the largest piece of foam that had fallen off to date. And we knew that it had hit the left wing. It definitely hit the orbiter. But we don't know how much damage it caused. We don't know, because that poof could totally be foam disintegrating when it hits.
Sure. I just, our discussion about the tiles, they're super fragile.
I'm going to tell you what it was eventually. But right now, no one knows what it was. Engineers were, of course, incredibly concerned about what happened after launch from the beginning. And they were concerned about how much damage could have happened because they don't know what's going on. The absolute worst case is damage down to the skin of the vehicle, going through either the reinforced carbon on the edges of the wings or the heat tiles. Because if you have that kind of damage going down to the skin of the vehicle, that's when on re-entry heat can get into that and melt the vehicle itself and tear things apart. Right. And we don't know.
Now, when you're talking about the edge of the wing, reinforced
Carbon.
carbon.
That's what it's called.
Carbon.
Reinforced carbon.
Okay. Every time you said that, I was like, is that what?
RCC. It's just really heat resistant material. And I don't know
Okay.
why they didn't use it everywhere. I'm sure there's a good reason for it, but
Here I'm like, was it carbon fiber?
I'm not stuttering. It's
I know.
reinforced carbon.
I believe you. I'm just kind of, I'm amazed that that's what they called it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what they called it. Now,
I'm sure there's a very legitimate reason.
I'm sure. Bob Page was one of the engineers that was concerned.
Uh-huh.
He immediately went to his boss, Wayne Hale, to tell him what had happened and what he was worried about, saying, this is the worst we've ever seen as far as foam. We saw this on STS-112. That was a big problem, and now this is bigger, and we don't know what's going on here. Hale pretty much immediately played it down. He wasn't that worried about it.
Of course. Yep,
he was saying, even in interviews now for documentaries that have come out in recent years, he's still talking about Bob Page came to me, but, foam's lightweight. It shouldn't do any damage. Our assumption has always been that foam can't do any damage. So I didn't really take him seriously.
Except for that one time.
Except for that time just 2 months ago.
And then this time.
Yeah.
And
Bob Page, however, was still really concerned. And despite Hale kind of pushing it down, he was like, hey, can we go ahead and contact the military and ask them to use one of their spy satellites to take a picture of this so we can see what kind of damage it did? Because we can't tell in the video. The way the video angle is, you can't see under the wing. You can't see if any damage happened. And on top of that, it's very blurry, but the military has great satellites. If you line everything up right, can we take a picture? And this is not unprecedented. This is something they had already done on a previous mission.
Oh, yeah?
Where a parachute door fell off of, I think it was the Challenger. I don't remember exactly which flight it was, but the parachute door fell off of one of the shuttles. So they asked the military to use their spy satellites to take pictures of it.
Okay.
To see what the damage was. Now, when they did that, the pictures didn't help much. So that's going to play into this. But in this case, Bob Page really felt that any picture was going to be helpful at this point because unlike the parachute door, we knew what had happened with the parachute door. We don't know what happened here.
Yeah.
Even if we just get an idea of which panel it hit, that's going to help us. Wayne agreed to look into it, which is saying good things, right? And
unless he's placating.
He's not. He called the local Air Force base. He asked them about it. He did not go through official channels at this point. NASA had a pretty good relationship with the military because, they're taking all their shit into space.
Yep.
So the military, it was, a handshake deal. But they were into the idea. They were willing to do it. They were willing to do it quickly. This wasn't going to be a problem. On the second day of the mission, Rodney Rocha also found out about the foam. He's another engineer. Hitting. And he was also immediately concerned when he saw the video. And he pretty much immediately started sending off emails asking for photos as well. So we've now got at least 2 people asking about whether or not we can do this. On day 3, after not getting a ton of traction from his boss, Rodney Rocha asked, okay, well, instead of photos, maybe we could just ask the astronauts to look out the hatch window to see if they can see any damage, because the astronauts don't have any idea this happened at this point.
That no one said anything?
Which sounds bad at first, but I do understand the logic that you don't want to scare them and stress them out over something that they can't do anything about. On this mission, they had no spacewalk capability. The space arm they usually have is not on board. The entire cargo section has been cleared out and made into a science station. So they have no repair materials. They have no way to really check it besides, looking out the hatch window. So I get it. You don't want to alarm them until there's cause for alarm.
So no.
And we're only on day 3.
Wouldn't necessarily do them any good.
Yeah. We're only on day 3 too. We're still getting a handle on what's going on. I get it. But his manager, Paul Shack, said no, that based on the video of where it landed, in all likelihood, the area that was struck wouldn't be visible from the orbiter. And he's not wrong. Where the damage did end up happening was not visible from the orbiter. But I think it's absolutely batshit insane that they didn't just have them look out the window. Like, what if they had been able to see something? It probably wasn't visible, but they didn't know for sure at that point. They didn't know exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And you can't ask them to look out the window. And the reasoning behind it was asking them to look out the window was a deviation from mission and could take away from some of the science that they were doing.
Oh, because
Looking out the fucking
so
window. Like, that one drove me a little bit crazy. I do understand not telling them exactly what's going on, but I don't understand refusing to ask them to look out the window.
I mean, though, if you're going on the not telling them because you don't want to spook them and worry them for no reason, essentially, asking them to look out the window would be like, okay, sure, but why?
I guess. I think the reasoning's kind of flimsy, though, personally, because it's just a fucking window. Hey, y'all, can you look out the window at the wing? Cool. Done. Like, it's not
Still
that
there?
hard, man.
Good.
So, but they didn't. They chose not to ask whatsoever. Nothing's going on. Day 4, the crew went on CNN to do a live show. The reporter who is doing this show had seen the foam strike, and he had asked NASA about it, and NASA had told him, don't worry, it's foam. We see this stuff all the time. Foam is not a big deal. He considered asking them about it, but ultimately decided not to, and it's something he regrets to this day. Because he feels like if he had brought it up and asked them about it, it may have changed things. Because if the crew had known and they were bugging, maybe something else would have happened.
Okay.
Day 5, engineers had now spent several days analyzing the film and had figured out that it was about the size of a suitcase and it was moving at 750 miles per hour.
Good God.
But they couldn't figure out exactly where it hit or what condition the vehicle would be in. The concern was obviously if the orbiter was too damaged, the heat of re-entry could cause further damage and make the vehicle come apart, killing everyone aboard.
Yep.
Pretty much every mission had tile damage up until this point, and the atmosphere is still can't possibly be damaged. It's just foam. It's just foam.
We've never had a problem with it before. We're going to roll the dice, roll on luck.
There had been a pretty big effort after Challenger to find a way to repair tiles in space, but it had ultimately been abandoned and deemed an acceptable risk. We don't need to repair these in space. They probably won't be damaged because it's just foam. So we don't need a repair system on board to be able to deal with this.
Never mind the vulture.
That day, there was a meeting of multiple engineers, managers, all these people about the damage and trying to determine what, if anything, should be done about this. It was chaired by Linda Ham, who is the mission manager. She was in charge of any changes and things that were happening on this particular mission. She was the very first woman to be certified as a flight director, and she made some poor choices. She's not my favorite, but that's cool. I like that. The STS...
She was the first woman.
That she was the first woman to be certified as a flight director.
But when you say she made some poor choices, is it like bad choices?
We're going to talk about it.
Okay, good.
We're going to talk about it. She ultimately brought up that we already had the rationale from STS-112 that basically foam can't do that much damage. So I don't think we're that worried about it right now. But why don't we go ahead and form a special team to try and determine the level of damage that had potentially happened. Do some math. Figure out how much damage foam can do. Do it without any testing, because no one has shot foam at 750 miles an hour.
That would be a fun test.
It's coming. I mean, I guess they just happened.
Yeah.
Test on the fly. Another one's happening later in this. But they decided that's what they were going to do. Most of the team was like, but we need a photo. Like, we need to know where it hit.
Let me see.
There's only so much we can do. And even if the photo isn't that good, if we know where it hit, we can do better math on this. Because right now, we just don't have enough information. We need another data point.
Yeah, you don't know.
To be able.
There's too many variables at this point.
The easiest one is get a picture. But if you can't get a picture, like, we need another data point. We can't. There's not much we can do. They were ignored and told to basically figure it out. Awesome.
Of course.
Rocha at this point sent an email complaining about this and saying that he needs another data point. And in that email, he said, quote, can we petition, parentheses, beg for outside assistance? So really starting to push harder about getting that photo, doing something differently going on here. And no one answered. No reply whatsoever. Systems integrations called Wayne.
If the Air Force was on board, I'm sorry. If the Air Force was on board with this, you said they talk to them. Why hadn't it happened?
They haven't gotten an official request yet. So they're willing to do it. All that needs to be sent over is the official paperwork.
But
We're only a few days in.
Person at NASA who would need to make the official request
is Linda Ham.
And is not doing it.
Well, she hasn't had it brought to her yet.
Fucking
Wayne has called, but he's kind of waiting to gather a bit more information before they go that far, which is crazy to me, but that's what's going on, which brings us to, this is the point where systems integrations, another department, so not just engineers, calls Wayne Hale to ask about more information too. This is not the team working on it.
Okay.
This is another department that was worried about it and saying, hey, we need more information. We need better photos. Yeah. So Wayne himself now has two people. These are people completely separate from Rodney Rocha asking for photos. And he's got the, unofficial but official from Patrick Air Force Base to be able to go and do it. Now, just keep in mind, in order to get these photos, it is more difficult than just pointing your iPhone at something. The space shuttle would need to change its trajectory, turn itself in the right direction to be able to get the photos. The spy satellite would need to do that. But for NASA in particular, it was going to have to interrupt the mission. They were going to have to inform the crew that something had happened because they were the ones who were going to have to do this. From a PR point of view, it's also not great for NASA to be asking for help, which is,
to our previous point of fuck your PR.
It's stupid, but that is part of their calculus that they're putting into this.
Mm-hmm.
So Patrick Air Force Base calls up Linda Ham, who turns around and calls Wayne later that day and tells him, look, no one else needs photos. Call it off. Don't get the photos. So she hears from Patrick Air Force Base and basically goes, no, we're not getting these photos, and tells Wayne to shut it the fuck down. We're not doing this.
Why? That's so dumb.
So in the interviews, he talks about how mad he was, but he also never asked her why she shut it down. And no one ever really, from what I read, asked her directly why she shut it down. She talked a lot about the choices she made. And we can speculate that it's likely because it would have interrupted so much of the mission, but we don't know for sure.
Okay.
Rocha, when he found out that this was happening, was just livid. He's getting more and more upset. He reminds me a lot about a lot of Bose Jolly.
Yeah.
Where he's getting progressively more like, what the fuck, people? This is a big problem. He emailed his boss, Paul Shack, asking again, why in the world are we not doing anything? Why in the world are we not getting more information on this? We can't figure this out unless you do something. Shack literally did not reply until Rocha called him up on the phone after a couple of emails. And Rocha starts yelling at him, why are you ignoring me? What the hell is going on? And Shack got really sarcastic and mean with him and basically told him that Rocha was a Chicken Little, and that Chicken Little is not to be trusted.
What a dick.
Stop saying the sky is falling.
I mean, it kind of is.
It kind of is. So, yep, nothing going on there. And Rocha, in a lot of his statements and interviews and whatnot, he talks about how, at this point, post-Challenger, NASA is basically plastered with posters that say things like, if it's not safe, say so. Where they're doing a lot of,
it's
publicity.
Service.
To make it look like that. And he's sitting there yelling, it's not safe, in front of a sign that says, it's not safe, say so. And his boss is calling him a chicken fucking little.
You gave me flashbacks to boot camp, actually.
I believe it.
Because there's signs all over boot camp saying cursing is not quality leadership. And your RDC would be standing right in front of the sign screaming obscenities at you.
Yep, checks. Yep, same idea here.
Yep.
Now, at this point, NASA did send an email to the crew telling them what a good job they were doing and, how great this all is. And almost as an afterthought, they added, by the way, it's not even worth mentioning, but there was a foam strike on the wing. We're only telling you in case it comes up in an interview, but there's nothing to worry about. So that's how they told the crew. So the crew knows now, but they think it's no issue because, of course, the people down on the ground wouldn't tell them that if it wasn't an issue, right? Right?
I mean, they included it in the email.
I mean, they told them. They told the crew. But the way they told them it.
They downplayed the shit out of it.
So on day 9 of the mission, Rodney's team presents their analysis to a board of NASA managers. They never did get their photos. And what they decided to do in lieu of having, the information that they needed to be able to do the analysis, instead of deeply analyzing the one area where there was damage, they analyzed basically the entire left wing for potential problems.
Okay.
So looked at every spot they thought the foam could have hit.
Because
and did an analysis of it.
You have to run every variable.
You have to run every one. So none of them were as deep of an analysis as they could have been because they had to do it in a short amount of time with not a lot of information. Most of what they found, well, all of what they found was that it would cause localized heating, but no burn through, no catastrophic damage, and it would essentially be what's called a turnaround problem, meaning it wasn't going to cause, they didn't think it was going to cause anything catastrophic, but would need to be repaired when the shuttle came back. And it should probably be analyzed to keep it from happening in the future. Rodney Rocha was at that meeting, and he was not thrilled about it. He did not think the data that they were presenting was accurate. In later statements, he said, essentially, these are engineering assumptions. We do not know without additional data if these assumptions are real or bear any, relation to reality.
Yeah, because they had to make stuff up.
But he didn't say anything.
Of course.
He was at the meeting.
He
didn't think it was great, and he didn't say anything. And I get it, I do. But this is one of the points, and it happened several times. I'm only going to highlight a few of them. But in the Challenger disaster, engineers were speaking up. They were being ignored, but they were speaking up repeatedly. They were doing the research. They were getting the data they could get, and they were doing it with or without permission. That really wasn't the case for the Columbia. The engineers were too scared to speak up at all. They might do it once, but they weren't doing it repeatedly. Once they were ignored, they shut up about it. And
when you're ignored so long on so many things, what do you do?
I think it also points to the changing culture, and not in a good way.
Yeah.
That before the Challenger, speaking up wasn't necessarily a bad thing. You might get ignored, but you weren't going to lose your job unless you took it too far. And now it definitely feels more like they're only hiring people who aren't going to speak up. They're only hiring yes men. The brain drain is real. And there's a few people like Rocha and Bob Page and whatnot who are speaking up, but they're only doing it to a point and not taking it any further. And that is, I think, it's a continuation of the problem. It's what happens when you have a culture like that and you don't fix it. You eventually get to that point.
Yeah.
But it's a difference. I think it's a difference. So that's where we are. That's
Yes men are a real problem.
The engineers, the people who do the math, who do the work, are recognizing the chain of command protocol and saying, I'm not going to approach this manager directly. I'm only going to talk to my direct boss, and I'm not going to push it any further. Even if Linda Ham is right there in front of me at a meeting, walking away from the meeting, having been told that everything is safe. The math was mathed, and we're not going to say anything. So that's where we are. On day 12 of the mission was January 28th, which was the anniversary of the Challenger disaster. So the Columbia crew gave a memorial message from space. All of NASA had a moment of silence for the Challenger crew, and they were due to come home in 4 days.
Okay.
In space, that mission, everything really went off without a hitch. The astronauts were able to do everything they wanted to do. They really had no idea that anything was really wrong, anything was going on. The email very much didn't give off what the problem may be. The families were able to call them via teleconference, like OG Zoom calls to space, which is pretty cool. The videos are just adorable and heartbreaking. Little Ian lost a tooth, showed his mom. His lost tooth, the kids talking to their parents, they're heartbreaking and beautiful and sad. Now, Laurel Clark, Ian's dad, Laurel Clark's husband, Ian's dad, worked for NASA.
Okay.
So he was actually on the control room floor. That was his whole deal. He found out a few days before they were due to come home about the foam that had come off and hit the left wing. He
didn't even know until
a few days before. He considered asking his wife about it while they were on teleconference, but chose not to because he didn't want to break protocol either. It wasn't his job.
Mm.
He wasn't supposed to tell the crew about anything that was going on. So, yep.
I'm sorry. When you're told don't tell them, like that automatically gives me like that makes me cringe.
I only bring it up because I feel really bad for him.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think it's not his fault. And I understand it, right? When you went on deployments, if something went minorly wrong at home, I didn't tell you about it.
Yeah.
I didn't. Like, we had kids fall and, cut themselves up pretty good. Or we would get like a horrible, horrible puke bug and all be on the floor of the bathroom together. And we didn't tell you about it because there wasn't a damn thing you could do about it. And I know that's not the same because us getting norovirus while you're in Japan isn't going to keep you from coming home. But I mean, I know from my experience that, we just didn't tell you when things went wrong because I didn't want you sitting on the boat worrying about something you couldn't do a damn thing about. So I get it. I do. I understand that. Or at least I understand it to an extent. I feel really, really bad for him because that's a terrible burden to live with in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So on January 31st, the day before the Columbia was set to come home, there was a press conference with Leroy Kane, who was one of the big NASA managers overseeing the space shuttle mission.
Okay.
And he was actually asked by the press at this point about the foam strike because the press knew the whole time. They saw it.
Yeah, they had footage of it.
They had footage of it. So they asked him about it. And he said NASA as a whole had absolutely no concerns about tile damage and they hadn't changed anything about their trajectory. They weren't worried at all. This was no problem. Chill. It's fine. Rodney Rocha was still incredibly stressed along with most of the other engineers. Many of them went out to dinner the night before the Columbia was supposed to come home and were discussing amongst themselves about how much pushback they had from management over the last 2 weeks and how frustrated they were and how if there was going to be an issue with the wing, it was going to be on re-entry.
Yep.
So, again, we knew.
The roughest time.
January 31st is also the day that many of the families decorated their homes for their astronauts' homecoming and left to go to the Cape to watch them come home. Which takes us to February 1st, 2003, landing day for the Columbia. Rick Husband and the crew got into their seats ready for re-entry. Not everyone had all of their gear on, despite NASA protocols. The space shuttle was designed to be what's called a t-shirt environment. Okay. So most of the buttons were kind of a pain in the ass to do with space gloves on.
Okay.
Having your full suit on was it was a pain in the butt to be able to do everything you needed to do. So a lot of them had their gloves off. None of them had their visors down, which means none of the suits were fully pressurized. Right. Now, this shouldn't be a problem. It had never been a problem before because it's supposed to stay pressurized the whole way down. But that's the thing. The crew in Houston communications were being played out over loudspeakers at the landing pad on the Cape.
Okay.
Like they always do. Rodney Rocha came in for the landing because he was so worried about the landing, which is not something he normally did. He was one of very few people who were there in the control of the Kennedy Space Center that even knew about the foam issue because most of the engineers and people who were working on it didn't come in for landing. That wasn't their job. That wasn't their part of everything.
Of the process.
Most of the people there had absolutely no idea that a foam had struck the left wing.
Okay.
The visibility that day was absolutely beautiful. The shuttle would enter the atmosphere over Hawaii and then take a path over the United States, flying over California, through Texas, and then down into Florida. The weather was good at Cape Canaveral, so they were good to go for what's called a deorbit burn. Deorbit burn is when they officially enter the atmosphere. They can no longer orbit the Earth one or two more times. And the space shuttle it's a glider.
Yeah.
It's shaped like an airplane, but once they do that, there's no turning back.
Yeah.
Flying around the Earth again is like, an aircraft circling the airport a few times. Once they enter in, though, they're in full landing. They cannot abort mission. This is what they're doing. So they're going. Good for deorbit burn. This is happening. The burn went pretty well. Communications were lost through the burn until post-burn, but everything was looking pretty good. There's actually a video that was taken by one of the crew up until about this point.
Okay.
Where they just had their camcorder going.
Yeah.
And they were having a great time. They were enjoying talking about the plasma that was forming. You can see the pink coming through the windows of the plasma on re-entry.
Oh, yeah, from
That's the heat from them
the heat,
going
yeah.
into, yeah. And you can see them with their visors up, laughing, just having a really good time. Clearly not
Excited
worried
to
at
be
all.
going home, yeah.
Excited to be going home. Just as the Columbia went over California, temperature sensors on the aft part of the left wing started being lost, one after another. Mission Control wasn't worried yet, but there was some concern in folks trying to, figure out what was going on. We've talked about temperature sensors being lost, probably 20 times at this point. This is one of those things where your interest is piqued, but you're not stressed. You kind of go, oh, what is that?
Yeah.
But you're not crazy worried yet. Unless you are Rodney Rocha, who saw that things are starting to go bad on the left wing, on the aft part of the left wing, which is where a thing would have struck. This is not a good thing. They are now getting over Texas. And at this point, Rick Husband's communications start to clip. This is not horribly unusual for communications to go in and out during this. But again, it's another sign. We're getting half Rogers. We're not getting full things. It's starting to get more problematic. It's 9 a.m. on the East Coast, and the residents of Texas were looking at the sky to see the shuttle fly by on its way home. At this point, the nose gear and the right landing gear also started to lose their sensor data, and more sensors start to go. Screens start to go blank with absolutely nothing showing up. There's no communications at all now from the shuttle, not just limited communications. And soon, everything is gone. All of the screens at Mission Control are blank. There's no information coming in. On the big screen,
not a good sign.
On the big screen, there's a line that shows, there's a green line that shows the expected shuttle route, and then there's a red line that is tracked by radar. It's radar that's tracking the space shuttle. It's radar from the ground that bounces off, and they show where it is on that screen. And the Columbia has stopped just over East Texas and is not moving anymore. The Columbia had been moving at about 5 miles per second, fast enough to fly from Chicago to New York in 2.5 minutes.
Damn.
8 times faster than a bullet. So that red line should not be stopped.
No.
Shouldn't be stopped. Now, Mission Control is trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And most people in the room think it's a data problem. It hasn't even occurred to them that it could be something worse. But in Texas, those who had been watching and filming the sky to see the space shuttle go by saw as the one bright piece split into 2 and then 3 and then 4 and looked like it was falling apart. And instead of being one contrail, there's multiple contrails falling through the sky. At the Cape, the countdown clock reached 0 and started counting up, something that always happened, but no one ever noticed because by then, the space shuttle has landed. In Mission Control, they're still trying to figure out what's going on, and really the noise coming through the room is the communications officer calling Columbia, Houston, comm check. Columbia, Houston, comm check. Over and over and over again, with the tracker still not moving past Texas. 12 minutes post losing communications, CNN starts to report on the lack of communications. And reporters were starting to call into Mission Control they had this special line. Remember, we used to have the squawk boxes?
Yeah.
Now they have a special line that they can call in and listen to what's going on in Mission Control. It's early 2000s squawk boxes. And all they're hearing is Columbia, Houston, comm check, Columbia, Houston, comm check. And it's at this point that an off-duty flight control officer who was in Texas called into Mission Control to tell them about the debris in the sky, which is when Mission Control finally realized that this was not a data problem.
Yeah.
This was catastrophic. The crew was gone.
Yeah.
The ship was gone. We had loss of flight, crew, and mission. And at that point, they initiated the contingency plan, which is what they did during Challenger as well, where they shut all of the doors, they stop taking any phone calls in or out, and collect all of their data so that it can be reviewed later. The point is not for them to solve the problem anymore. The point is for them to make sure nothing gets lost.
The data.
Yeah. I'm going to try really hard. Nacogdoches, Texas.
I would have probably fucked that up too.
Just east of Dallas. People started reporting hearing multiple booms and pieces of metal falling all over the town. Some
Oh,
of them
man.
starting fires in different buildings. One apartment building burned down from it.
God.
There's multiple people calling into the local police department full of fear that it was a terror attack because they were pretty sure it was the space shuttle. People who had been watching. Did it get blown up? What's going on here? People who didn't know it was the space shuttle. There's just shit falling from the sky.
Yeah.
And booms happening.
Freaky.
They're terrified. I don't know if you've ever seen the iconic videos of, I don't know if iconic's the right word, the infamous videos of the Columbia breaking apart in the sky.
I'm not sure I have.
I'll show them to you. And for anyone who's listening, it's going to be the picture for this episode. The multiple debris falling through the sky. That was filmed in Nacogdoches, Texas. They saw this. There were pieces over 2,000 miles, but most of them fell in this kind of area of Texas.
I mean, when you're going that fast, it's going to be spread pretty.
It really did start falling apart in
far.
California, but this is where most of them were found, and it was horrible. There was pieces all over, thousands of pieces, big pieces, little pieces. It was just a lot. It was terrifying for the people in that area to have all of this going on and not knowing what it is for sure. There were multiple people crying in Mission Control at this point because they didn't know that there's always a chance for a disaster. But unlike Rodney Rocha, who really knew, this is a good possibility, most people had
no idea.
Everything looked great up until that point. The launch looked like it went well. The mission went well. Everything was going as expected until suddenly it wasn't. So it was horrifying. This is also when families started being removed from the landing pad area and taken to crew quarters to keep them out of the press eye and to let them know, this is what's going on. There, on that landing pad, all of the astronaut family escorts' phones are ringing. Poor Bob Cabana was the one who had to tell the families what had happened. And just watching him talk about that moment was heartrending because he talks about how, he didn't want to give them any false hope. That the last thing he wanted to do was to have some of these kids walk away thinking maybe it'll be okay and have to be re-traumatized all over again. What a hard choice to have to make in that moment. And it sounds like he did.
Because you want to comfort them, but
I think he did comfort them, but he also was clear that there was no chance of survival at this point. Yeah. And that's a hard decision to make, but I applaud him. From everything I saw, I think he did the best anyone possibly could have done in that situation.
I can't even imagine. That's
horrifying. God. Absolutely horrifying to have to be the one to do that. And it's amazing to me what a family NASA is throughout the course of this, 4-part series we've done now. So many moments, because he's an astronaut as well. So many moments where the astronauts just take care of each other, and they clearly just gather around families of anyone who's lost and very much take care of them. And I think it's horrible that they had to do that, but it's beautiful as well that they do that they don't leave it to someone else, that these are our people. We're going to take care of them. And I like that. It says a lot about what kind of community is in a good way. Now, folks in Nacogdoches and all over Texas started breaking out old school camcorders and cameras to take photos. One of the most infamous photos from this as well was of an astronaut's helmet that was found in somebody's front yard. And the helmet did have remains in it. Now, I'm not going to get into as much detail about the remains, both because I don't have as much information and because the family specifically requested that a lot of the information be not available to the public. So we're not going to get into as much this time, but I will say they found a helmet with human remains in it, and not too far from that, they found the first set of human remains in somebody's yard. And I bring it up mainly because, can you imagine waking up one day and going into your front yard, hearing a boom, and an astronaut falls into your yard? What? That is fucking horrific.
Yeah.
Fucking horrific.
That's out of a horror movie.
And it's not just that. Even there's just thousands of pieces of this space shuttle everywhere, and a lot of them are quite dangerous. They're filled with rocket fuel. They're filled with things that people should not be touching, that should not be in the water supply, that could blow up, that are just they're not good. So NASA pretty much instantaneously, once they realized what was going on, called the FBI and was like, "Who you got in this area?
We need
someone to help organize the locals until we get our people out there to protect people from this." And to, if in any way you can find some of these bodies or you hear people talking about remains, like, please protect them. Don't move them. Protect them so we can get our people there and we can take care of our own.
Yeah.
And Terry Lane was an FBI agent that was there, and he ended up being the one who took charge of a lot of the stuff that happened before NASA. And by all accounts, he did an absolutely phenomenal job of getting the word out to the public, organizing the local police forces, because this is where a lot of it fell, are very rural Texas towns. So these are, I'm sure they're good cops, right? I'm sure they're good at their job, but when the fuck have they dealt with something like this?
Yeah, never.
They have no experience in this whatsoever. Not that the FBI does, but I'm sure the FBI has more experience than, Joe Dirt cop in rural Texas. Like, just, that's a lot. Now, in mission control, while Terry Lane is taking control of this, there was an engineer that was talking to Rodney Rocha and starts saying there's nothing we could have done, sobbing, just really upset. And poor Rocha has just finally lost his mind at this point. They're in the middle of contingency. This poor woman's crying, and he just starts yelling at her that he's sick and tired of hearing that. He's been hearing it for 2 weeks, and he didn't want to hear it anymore. That we knew it was a problem. We knew it was a problem, and it wasn't her fault. But I bring it up because, like,
that was a straw that broke the camel's back.
He finally he fell apart. Mark Kelly. Do you know who he is?
Sounds familiar, but
he's a senator in Arizona now. I love Mark Kelly, so you've probably heard me talk about him in other contexts.
Okay.
But he was an astronaut. He was in the same class. Yeah, he's amazing. I fucking love Mark Kelly. Okay. He was in the same class as a number of the American astronauts that were on STS-107.
Okay.
And when he heard what had happened, he heard about it fairly quickly. He basically commandeered a helicopter and flew out there to help with the recovery efforts. This is part of why I love Mark Kelly. Yeah. By the way, just, I don't know if it's personal, and anyone else who's listening, I knew about this part of his story before doing this research, and it's one of the reasons I fucking love him, because he pretty much didn't ask for permission. He asked for forgiveness. He got on a helicopter and he went out there, with the express purpose of finding the remains of his fallen comrades and making sure that they were treated with respect and making sure that the way they were gathered is something that was good, and making sure that, nobody touched them, nobody did anything, that they were found and they were taken care of. And he achieved that. He got on a helicopter. He was out there pretty much instantaneously. He made sure that nobody was removed until a religious leader of their faith had come and given the last rites, whether it was Jewish, Hindu, or Christian. And very much he jumped into action and he took care of them, whether they were people that he trained with in his class or people from another country. And that's awesome. I love Mark Kelly. Like, man's amazing. So he got there. He went to that house that we had talked about immediately, because as soon as he knew, he got them collected. He really helped organize a lot of the NASA effort, really helped with Terry Lane, that was his name, right? The FBI agent who was there? Yes, Terry Lane. Letting him know, like, these parts are the ones that are really dangerous. Yeah. These ones are, we should still collect them, but, like, focus on these parts here, because this is what can really fuck up people's days. They didn't want other people to get hurt either. They didn't want this to become a compounded problem. And with all of that, he's also just livid, wondering what the hell happened.
Absolutely.
How did this happen again?
And
God,
saying that again.
Almost to the date for the anniversary, too. Like, end of January, early February. Not a good time for NASA. Not a good time to go to space.
No. Don't do it.
Don't do it. Oh. Many others felt the same way and really wondered what the future of the program would look like. There was a lot of thoughts that this was just going to end the Space Shuttle program. That this was the end of it. And it wasn't, thankfully, I guess. I think it's thankfully. I do like the Space Shuttle program, despite the fact that it's a hot-ass mess and the thing probably never should have gone off the ground in the first place. But there was a lot of questions.
Yeah.
A lot of questions. NASA, I don't know if I want to say learning from Challenger or relearning from Apollo 1, but NASA decided to talk to the press.
They have to learn the same lesson a few times.
It feels in a lot of ways like they learned from Apollo 1 forgot it after Apollo 13, and Challenger is like redo of Apollo 1.
Yeah.
That they fucked up in so many different ways. And the way they handled a lot of Columbia, I don't know if it's better. It's not as good as Apollo 13, obviously.
Yeah.
But it is an improvement over. But they gave a statement pretty much right away.
Okay,
They did
that's
not
new.
just tell the press to fuck off. They coordinated with then President George Bush. They gave their statement first, and then George Bush addressed the country with, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember watching this live, his speech where he talked about the Columbia is lost, there is no survivors. And that was, for me, just, I was still quite young. I was a high schooler. I had lived through 9/11. We'd all lived through 9/11 if you were alive. And now Georgie is up there again telling us about this horrible thing that had happened. And I feel like so much of my teen years are just George Bush telling me bad things. Something else awful happened.
Wow.
Right, though?
And to clarify, this is George W. Bush that we're talking about.
W.
W.
Yes, it's George W.
Oh, it's not wasn't a question. I'm clarifying.
Yeah, no, you're fine. So, he gets up, he does that. And the country is just horrified. This is the 28th flight, the 113th shuttle mission, the second major shuttle disaster. People are confused. They're heartbroken. They're horrified. And with that, pretty much from the beginning, CNN was asking, so about that phone.
Yeah.
And if you recall from the Challenger episode, the press is very much what pushed a lot of this stuff forward. That initial statement obviously didn't say anything about foam. CNN is going, hold up. Hold up, guys.
Saw this. Let's replay the footage.
Can we talk about it? And they really were. They replayed. It was the footage of that foam strike and then the footage of the Columbia breaking apart 24/7 on CNN over and over and over again. Very shortly after the disaster,
NASA.
Right? NASA had a full-on press conference, and the press is once again asking about the foam, like what's going on. Now, Ron Ditmore, who is the head of NASA, he's the James Beggs of 2003.
Okay.
He said the foam absolutely did not represent a safety concern. It could not have been the foam. Definitive statements that there's no way this is what it could have been in the first, not statement, but first press conference where they're getting questions. And swore they'd find out what happened, but don't give definitive statements. You don't know it wasn't the foam.
Yeah.
You don't know.
But, and I'm sure anyone watching, this is the same thoughts that we're having right now. Okay, we saw that happen.
I mean,
and then
CNN,
when it comes down, we see it break up.
CNN is straight up saying it to his face. We saw this. We saw it happen. How can you say that? And he's
how can you say
it's
it's not a possibility?
No, it's fine. But that's what he said. So there is almost immediately an independent investigation called for.
Yep.
NASA was not going to be allowed to do this on their own. It was mostly headed by Steve Wallace. He was flown in to Barksdale Air Force Base to start reconstructing the Columbia to try and figure out what's going on. They were going to treat this much like a plane crash. Find every piece they could and put it back together to figure out exactly what had happened.
Oh, that's going to be difficult.
It is going to be difficult, but
it's quite a lot
that's
of speed.
the goal, because that's the only way you're going to get a truly definitive answer is to look at the evidence that's right there. Patrick Goodman,
pictures.
or to take pictures. Patrick Goodman was also a large part of the investigative team that was putting the shuttle itself back together.
Okay.
He and Wallace and most of the people on this investigation team were trained in airplane crashes or military plane crashes, but they weren't trained in space shuttle crashes because who the hell is trained in a space shuttle crash?
Right.
They're also not trained in space shuttles in general, so they were having to get quite a bit of information from NASA to understand, what piece is this? Where does this go? What does this do? What does this happen? And NASA, it was such a mixed bag. There were some people that were super helpful, but a lot of the higher ups and the managers really.
Well, this is you got clearance for this.
Yep, you got to file this paperwork to get that information to do this thing, and it was kind of a mess to figure all of this out, and it took weeks to put everything back together in the best way they could possible, both between delays from NASA and just. It's a lot of shit to gather throughout the woods of Texas. It's a lot going on. There was a memorial service on February 4th, 2003 in Houston, which again included poor Neil Armstrong.
Oh, man.
Because that guy is just every fucking space story. Bless Neil Armstrong. So he was there. George Bush spoke at it. One of the only people who did not attend it, though, was Rodney Rocha. He ended up spending the entire memorial service at his desk sobbing because he was just so upset about what had happened. Inside NASA, internal conflict was building steadily as they were going through this investigative process. Like I said, some were happy to investigate. Rocha loved helping the investigators.
Oh,
He was thrilled about it. Some
with
fought
rage.
hard. Yep, with rage. It was rage help. It was easy in the NASA culture to really just kind of be shunted off to, Timbuktu.
Yeah.
To be not fired necessarily, because these are federal workers, but
just
put in a
moved
shitty-ass job.
else.
So it's a mixed bag, and there's definitely quite a bit of stuff going on. While they're doing all of this, a number of people obviously know it's the foam, but they don't know it's the foam. Meanwhile, Ditmore is giving another press conference saying, again, it's not the foam, except this time he actually brought foam with him and samples to hand out to the press, saying, look at how light it is. It can't possibly be the foam. Guys, it's not the foam. Again, definitively saying, basically swearing, I'll find out who did this, but it's not this guy, and holding up the foam. Like, fucking bananas. They still hadn't done any tests, by the way. Like, NASA could have done a test at any point to prove that it wasn't the foam. They didn't. They just sent Ditmore
big
out
enough piece of anything and throw it hard enough, fast enough, it's going to do some damage.
Now, the investigatory board and the investigators who are putting this back together were quite thorough, and they were very much behind the idea of follow the debris. Look at what the debris tells you.
Yeah.
And that's your answer. It was not that long after they got most of that left wing put back together that they were able to see that there were tiles completely burned, that the RCC, the reinforced carbon-carbon, had burned differently. The tiles next to it had burned differently than the rest of the shuttle. In particular, RCC Panel 8 was almost clearly the panel that had caused the entire issue. Now, RCC 8 would have been within that range of where the foam debris strike was.
Of course.
This is almost certainly
I'm amazed they found
where the problem came from. Now, this is reinforced carbon-carbon, and that reinforced carbon-carbon is connected to these heat tiles that are a known issue that's going on.
Yep.
And they protect that metal of the space shuttle.
Yep.
If there is a compromise in those, it's going to be catastrophic. And it's pretty clear something happened to damage the RCC on Panel 8. And shockingly, catastrophic damage. Obviously, NASA didn't believe this at all.
Of course. It couldn't be the foam.
They did believe that it was RCC Panel 8, but they thought something else must have hit it. It couldn't possibly be
another
the
vulture.
Foam. There's no way, another vulture. At this point, Stephen Wallace starts asking about the foam strikes and what research they had actually done on them. Like, show me your tests. Like, you don't believe this? Cool. Prove it. Show me. And found out that there was over a half dozen reports, foam striking the orbiter, coming off and hitting it. The first one was and these are not the little ones. These are big foam strikes.
Okay.
Not as big as the one that happened here, but like not the popcorning where it's just like a little tiny piece of foam.
Okay.
The first one was in 1983.
Oh, damn.
And this is not just foam strikes. This is that left bipod ramp that I was telling you about, where it's the little tubes that connect it to the solid rocket booster. So the first one of just that particular spot of the foam coming off was in 1983, then in 1990, then in 1992, then again in 1994. So like it's happening over and over again.
Yeah.
Small pieces fell all the time. And, again, they're just saying it's only foam. And there's no real data other than acknowledging that this happened and no one died. We talked about this, already. STS-112 Atlantis in October 2002, where there was a significant strike on the rocket booster. This is where they really should have started doing things. And Stephen Wallace was like, what the fuck? Why did you fly anything after STS-112? Like, you've had all of these things happen, and now you have another one happen that caused actual damage. I understand that it wasn't catastrophic, but it caused damage. They also uncovered that Linda Ham had sent an email to Ditmore 6 days before the Columbia launched, about the foam strikes, specifically about STS-112. She had said the rationale for flight STS-112 was lousy. Rationale states we haven't changed anything and we haven't experienced damage in 112 flights. Risk of loss of bipod ramp TPS is same as previous flights with no added risk. Rationale was lousy then and still is. So she knew that the rationale of we've not had an issue, so we're cool, was
stupid.
Shit. But she still denied the photos. She still didn't do more things. And there's a pretty prevailing thought that it was both the obvious of normalization of deviance, the idea that, this thing has happened over and over and over again. While it is a deviation from our protocols that says we can't be shedding debris, it also hasn't killed anyone, so we're good.
Yeah.
But I think it also really speaks to the idea that there was probably an undercurrent of thought that they couldn't do anything. If there was damage, they didn't think they could solve the problem. And that is so incredibly frustrating to think about in those terms because, somebody else spoke on it. I forget who the quote was from, but they talked about how they didn't even have the chance to be Apollo 13. They weren't given the opportunity to try and find a solution because they had already given up from the very beginning. And I think there's a lot of
we don't have a good idea right now, so
we're going to get to it a little bit more later, but there's a couple of different ways that people have talked about that there's a chance they could have saved the Columbia. Maybe not the ship, but the people, if they had realized that there was damage and they had put the work in to solve it instead of putting the work in to ignore it and pretend like it wasn't a problem. But that's where we are. So this is, people were willing to accept the risk, but they didn't know what the risk was because they hadn't actually done anything. And Stephen Wallace is uncovering all of this.
That's the problem, really.
There's another presser going on where NASA's question about why they didn't get more imaging. And they said they'd had that discussion, but it wouldn't have helped. So again, this idea of we could have, but why? Why should we bother? Why should we even bother?
You're just living with deficiencies.
Just living with
known deficiencies.
Yep. They're going through all of this stuff now, and they're uncovering all of this. They're uncovering things like after Challenger, they had created a safety board.
Mm-hmm.
And the manager of the safety board admitted during these hearings that he didn't know who he actually reported to.
What?
Yeah. And just this culture of we can't do anything. We can't move forward. We're immobilized by our rationalizations and by our protocols and by these things. And it's just, it is echoes of Challenger. But it's what happens when you don't solve problems like what led to Challenger.
And I think that's also a huge byproduct of what you've talked about previously with Challenger and with this one is the brain drain.
The brain drain, for real.
People leaving for one reason or another, and the new people coming in, they're likely of no fault of their own, aren't at the same caliber because a lack of training and the culture. And
I think that's part of it. And I think it's also just when you had people who were there since Apollo, who were there since the safety culture made sense, they were far more willing to speak up far more aggressively than people that were hired into a safety culture that was shitty. They may all have the same level of training. The people who worked for NASA at the time of Columbia, who knows? Maybe they could have come up with something brilliant.
I'm not speaking to intelligence at all.
Right, but I think it's also not just training. Sure, I agree with training too, and I do agree with it. You're not getting the best and brightest when you don't give people the opportunity to be the best and brightest that they are.
Yeah.
But I also think that if you just had opened up that culture, who knows? Who knows what they could have done?
Because you didn't give it the chance.
You didn't let them be great. Let them be great. I also wanted to mention specifically Diane Vaughn.
Okay.
So I have her book, The Challenger Launch Decision, linked in the show notes because it's one of the books that I read. And she was actually called to testify before this Columbia Accident Investigation Board.
Okay.
Because she literally wrote the book on the Challenger decision making. She was a sociologist. And her book it's a lot of talk about groupthink. It's a lot of talk about this normalization of deviance. Like she literally wrote the book on why this is a problem. And she was called to talk about it, to talk about how and why this kind of culture is such a problem, because she's brilliant. And in her testimony, it was pretty startling because she was talking about, how the NASA organizational culture and decision-making processes contributed to both of these disasters. And she emphasized that NASA had not sufficiently addressed the underlying issues that had happened, that had caused the Challenger incident, which led to this going on here.
Yep.
And when she was questioned about hey, so did NASA ever call you? Because you wrote the book on this. It would make sense for NASA to call you. Because don't you go around and speak on this and train people? And she's like, oh yeah, I do trainings on that. The Navy called me and I did trainings for the Navy, the Army, the Marines, the Coast Guard, police departments, my old high school boyfriend. But no, NASA never called me. They never asked me to come in and talk about it. And so she's been making a fucking living off of teaching people how to not have this shitty ass culture that she identified at NASA because of the Challenger explosion in the book. And NASA never called her. They never asked her to come in. They never asked her for any recommendations on how to make things better.
It goes back to what you said, at the start of this episode, or close to the start of this episode, about that mentality of being the smartest in the room, that they're too far above it.
Yeah, it's just, it's bonkers. I cannot believe I'm at almost 2 hours again. Bless it. So even after proving that it was almost definitively the foam, after all of these things going on at these, hearings and trials and all this other stuff, NASA still doesn't fucking believe it's the foam. So the investigators were like, you know what? We're just going to fucking test it. We're going to get a cannon. We're going to shove foam in it and we're going to shoot it in an RCC panel. And they initially were going to do lead up tests where they're going to shoot it at lower intensity and work their way up to 750. And Patrick Goodman was like, fuck that. We're just going to shoot it. We're going to shoot it at 750 miles an hour and see what the fuck happens. Because if they don't think it can happen, okay. If it doesn't happen, we'll figure something else out. But we're just going to shoot it and shut everyone up. So they do. And it blew a gigantic fucking hole in the reinforced carbon. So not even the heat tiles, which are so much more fragile than the reinforced carbon. We knew the heat tiles were an issue. We knew this was a major problem. But the RCC, which significantly more stable, it blew a fucking hole in that. Now, the heat tiles played a role. The fact that the heat tiles were able to get heat into them because of the hole in the reinforced carbon, and then that's why everything fell apart. But if it could blow a hole in the RCC, it could have obliterated the wing if it had hit the tile during liftoff. This is a major fucking problem, and it was not that hard of a test to put together. You just shoot the foam at the thing. They just took a wing of, they took a piece from the actual orbiter and shot foam at it. This is 2 fucking hearings now where someone comes out with a test that just makes a lot of sense and doesn't cost a lot of money, and NASA's like, oh fuck, you right, my bad. So yeah, that's where it is.
You didn't bother to do the damn thing.
The commission found that, it's this workplace culture, and NASA made a lot of changes. And I do think NASA made a lot of changes after all of that. But it ultimately doesn't change the fact that this culture, this mentality, not only did it kill 14 people, in Columbia's case in particular, I find it even more haunting that if they had allowed their people to be their people, I firmly believe that the people who worked at NASA could have figured something out. There's a number of people who have different ideas even now. They still talk about it, that maybe they could have outfitted Atlantis and done a rescue mission to get them off of Columbia and onto that. One of the other things they talk about is if they had changed the trajectory so that the majority of the heat was on the right wing and not on the left wing, that could have kept it. But there's just so many potential options that if NASA
had time to come up with all of that.
16 days.
If they had
16 days. That's more time than they had for Apollo 13.
Yeah.
And they didn't even give themselves the opportunity. And, maybe they would have failed. Maybe it was a completely lost cause. Maybe there was nothing that could have been done at that point, and because of their problems that had led to even allowing this to happen in the first place.
Nothing can happen when you do nothing.
But that's what's so haunting to me, is that they just didn't even give these really brilliant people the opportunity to do something. It never should have happened in the first place. The foam should have been solved long before Columbia launched on January 16th. Absolutely. But if you had just given people the chance to be great, if you had just done the work to find out what was going on, this really could have been different. The reason Apollo 13 is NASA's finest moment is because they didn't give up. They spent the time to figure out what had happened. And they solved the problem, and they got them home.
They didn't stick their head in the sand. They didn't hide information. They listened when people brought things up.
Mm-hmm. So I find that very haunting. I find that. They did make a lot of changes, though. And, it's been over 20 years, which is longer than the space between Challenger and Columbia. No. And there hasn't been any other major disasters yet. Yeah. The next mission was launched on July 26, 2005. That was STS-114. That one lasted 13 days. That was it was a test flight to test quite a few new safety procedures and shuttle modifications. They had added things like repair kits for the tiles in the RCC. And, they had changed up the spacesuits to make them more functional for landing and all these other things. They also included new procedures that they had to do every mission, like going on a spacewalk to inspect the orbiter, which, golly gee, that seems like we should have been doing that before.
You just launched this fucker on a rocket.
Yeah, they also changed,
maybe take a look at it.
Yeah, they changed, the foam, too. And limited, a ton of changes. A ton of things changed, and that's great. Mark Kelly ended up launching on STS-121 again and spent some time in space, which he really, really loved and really, really enjoyed. The legacy of the Columbia and the Space Shuttle program was really about learning to fly safely and learning how to roll with the punches and learn from your mistakes, truly learn from them. And I think NASA learned. I hope they did. They certainly didn't have any other problems. And the last shuttle mission was July 8th, 2011, when Atlantis flew up to the International Space Station, did their stuff, and came home. And we haven't launched space shuttles since then. We still have the International Space Station. Mm-hmm. They're working on, they did work on a fundamental redesign, and they are now working on the Artemis program, which I don't know if you've heard of the Artemis program.
It's vaguely familiar.
It's pretty fucking cool, I think. But I love space. The Artemis program is designed to create kind of a permanent moon base, and eventually it's going to return us to the moon, put a moon base, and then eventually send us to Mars. That is the goal of the Artemis program. They completely redesigned the space rocket system. Pretty much everything is different at this point, which is a very good thing because, let's be real, the space shuttle was just fucking problematic from the beginning. On November 16th, 2022, 19 years after the Columbia, the first Artemis mission launched. And it was unmanned. Remember Columbia? Manned? Yeah. We're learning our lesson. I'm feeling better about things already. The Artemis was launched and sent around the moon and came back just to test it. Mark Kelly is now a senator and works to make sure that NASA has both the funding that it needs and the culture and oversight to be able to stay safe. Mm-hmm. The Artemis mission has quite a few plans coming up, including one this year. This year is supposed to be Artemis 2, and it's supposed to be the first crewed mission testing Orion's capabilities around the moon. So launching them, flying around the moon, very similar to what the early Apollo missions were. They're not going to land yet, but they're going to fly around the moon. They're planning on landing Artemis 3 on the moon in 2026. First
year.
Yeah, first moon landing since Apollo. I'm actually hoping, not going to lie, our trip in fall is timed for when Artemis 2 is supposed to launch. So I'm kind of hoping
We get to see
we
it.
can do that, because I think that would be really cool.
That would be really cool.
They are planning Artemis 4 Plus in the late 2020s and early 2030s, establishing a lunar gateway station, which is the moon station, and eventually
motherfucking moon base.
Moving on to Mars. This is the plan going on. And I'm very sad to see a lot of the discussion of the Artemis program in the news these days. I don't know how many people follow this stuff, but I do. And there's a lot of bullshit about how NASA has Artemis and they can do these things. They can go up. There's the guys that are stuck in space right now.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of stuff about why can't NASA just launch Artemis and go get them? And I'm kind of like, can we shut the fuck up? Because every time we push NASA to go faster, people die. And the dudes in space are up there. If you read their statements, they are literally repeatedly shouting into the void, we don't feel stuck.
We're fine.
We're good. Can y'all... They literally asked, can you stop talking about it? In almost those exact words. Can you guys just stop talking about this? We're good. Please don't send a half-decent ship.
We'll wait for the one that's planned.
But if you read between the lines, and I actually like SpaceX. I think SpaceX is kind of cool. It is what it is. But also,
they've done some incredible things.
SpaceX keeps blowing up.
This is also true.
So I'm kind of with the astronauts of I have a choice between Artemis or SpaceX. SpaceX keeps blowing up. And every time someone pushes NASA to do things before they're ready, people fucking die. I'll stay here. I'll wait.
It's ready.
I'm good. Can you just leave me alone? But yeah, that's where it sits right now. It's my little bit, I don't know if it counts as politics, but my PSA. Can we all shut the fuck up and just talk nice to NASA? Because when we stress NASA out.
Don't stress it out.
NASA makes really dumb decisions.
No, don't rush.
We're good. We're good. You got it. Take your time. It's all good. Because I love NASA. Despite knowing these things about NASA.
Do those tests.
Do the test. Well, they've done an unbelievable number of tests for Artemis. And I'm not going to get into the crazy details on it. But it's, from what I have read and what I have seen, I feel way more confident. I am sure people reading about the space shuttle when it first started felt confident. So take it with a grain of salt. Because I'm not working inside of NASA, and these things weren't coming out for public consumption until after people died. So we'll see. But I feel like there's been good changes, and you hear about hearing people who work for NASA talk about NASA now. They talk about it with such reverence and joy, and that does not feel like the same culture that you heard people talking about it in the early 2000s.
The way people associate with their work and where they work, and that tells you a lot about the culture.
I think so.
And if it's super crummy, you're getting pushed off, told to shut up, things like that, you don't have a good outlook of where you work.
I also feel like if NASA culture had gotten really shitty, Mark Kelly would be out here yelling at them. I feel bad putting all of the pressure on one fucking senator from Arizona. But I do feel like Mark Kelly, just from everything I've read about him, would be upfront and honest. Because I think he cares about a lot of things. But I do think he got into politics for space.
Fair enough.
Essentially. And I love him. I love the way he talks about things. I love the way he thinks about things. So I feel like if NASA still had major problems, he'd be all up in their shit. Yeah. All up in their grill, making noise. And he's not. So we're good. Right? It's fine. Anyways, go to space. It'll be fun. Let's go to Mars.
Just not in those months.
Oh, yeah. Don't go anywhere. I mean, so do you remember when we moved here? That was also early February. We had this horrible PCS move where everything went wrong. I'm convinced that early February, late January is just a bad time of year. That's also when we got norovirus. It's just a bad time of year, man. Just don't do it. Those 2 weeks, just don't do it. So yeah, that's the lesson to learn from this. Don't do it in late January or early February. Whatever it is, don't. So how do you feel? Do you feel super angry still? You feel a little better?
No, I'm not as angry on this one. There's some stupid stuff there.
It's still incredibly frustrating.
It's very frustrating, but there was good here too, good things that were included, good things that happened in a terrible situation.
Yeah.
where you see the good side of humanity show through.
I think so. And I think there's a lot. I mean, there was good things in all of them too, but the Columbia is it is the final chapter of a very sad story.
Yeah.
But I do feel like it closes out with hope now that we can look back on it 20 plus years later. It didn't feel nearly as hopeful at the time.
Oh, no.
But 20 years is not a crazy long time. And I do feel like it's gotten better. And I do feel more confident in their abilities. I do worry about taking the kids to the first manned flight of Artemis, but I want to go anyway. I think it'd be fun.
As long as it's not in January, February.
I mean, that's true. No launches at that point. So yeah, that is the tale of woe, the tale of trauma, the tale of space.
That was a big one.
Yeah, I think it's
saga.
gonna tap out at 8 hours. I don't know, something stupid. I'd say I'm sorry, but I'm not. So that's where we are. And is there anything else you want to add, or should we wrap it up and do our socials?
Let's probably wrap it up.
All right. So we have socials. We're everywhere. We are on Facebook. We are on TikTok. We are on Instagram. I have not been posting much lately. I'll probably get back to it someday. I don't know, but I'm there. If you message me, I'll see it. And I like socials. Did I name them all?
No, but we said everywhere.
I'm on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, Blue Sky, TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
And our website is www.catastrophe-chronicles.com. That is where I post the show notes. And that is where you will find links to all of the multitude of books that I read, a ton of different articles, brief synopses of the episodes. And just, I really enjoy that. So I've been putting a lot of effort and time into that. Our email is catastropheChroniclespod@gmail.com. Feel free to email us with any of your comments, questions, or concerns. We have a tip jar that's linked in our show notes on the podcast description or on our website. If you would like to help financially support the podcast and help me pay for some of the books that I buy for this every week, that would be great. Don't feel obligated. We love you no matter what. And with that,
stay safe, everyone.
And stay curious.